Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Sherman, and I'm the land steward at Steep Rock Association. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's presentation, a second look at nativars and their place in your garden with Chris Koppel. Tonight's talk is the final program in Steep Rock Association's 2026 Winter Speaker Series. Thank you for joining us. Just some basic housekeeping notes before we start. Please make sure you're muted during this presentation. If you have any questions or comments, we gladly welcome you to use the chat feature, which you can find below, and Chris will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. Tonight's talk is being recorded and will be posted to our website for viewing. Also, please keep an eye out for an email from us, which will contain a short questionnaire. We value your feedback and would like to hear any comments you may have regarding tonight's presentation or any suggested topics that you'd like to hear discussed in the future. Lastly, before I introduce tonight's speaker, my sincere thanks go out to all of our supporters. We're a nonprofit organization and able to provide these programs free because of the generosity of our donors. Our event sponsors can be seen on the slide here this evening, currently on the screen, but perhaps some of you watching may have made contributions to Steep Rock in the past. We can't thank you enough for your support. If you'd like to support our efforts in the future, please visit the website or contact the office. With that, I'm delighted to introduce tonight's speaker, Chris Koppel. A Connecticut native, Chris brings a deep passion and extensive knowledge of plants to the Steep Rock Association board. Growing up amidst the marshes and beaches of Connecticut, Chris developed a lifelong appreciation for the natural world. Throughout his career in estate management, he is focused on agriculture while maintaining native ecologies in woodland and grassland buffers. Chris's past projects include private estates in Seal Harbor, Maine, Mount Kisco, New York, and others. Nativars can serve as a bridge between native plants and ornamentals, offering a fresh perspective, inspiring gardeners, and enhancing the landscape around us. Chris explores the selection and propagation of these high-value, garden-worthy native plants, mixing a vibrant new palette for landscapes, which blend beauty and ecological harmony. And with that said, I will now hand things over to Chris.
Dan, thank you so much. Thank you. Get situated here, and we will hop to it. All right. Good evening, everybody. Again, thank you, Dan. My name is Christopher Koppel, and honored to be here for the final winter speaker series on an 80-degree day, which is a little bit fun, but we're going to be talking cool plants and how important they could be. I think Dan's phrase of like garden worthy, I think is like really key. It's a phrase I want to catch on when we talk about native plants. There's so much about what they do for everybody else, but it's like, what do they do for us? So again, really happy to be part of Steep Rock Association. I started on the stewardship committee, of which I'm still a member, and then also was honored enough to be selected to be on the board of trustees and been on that for a bit. And working on the Holiday House project with Merlin and Rory for the restoration of that, and a native garden that will go there in the future that will more than certainly use nativars. So my speaker series is called Gardening in the Gray because I just say like everything is so polarized nowadays. Every conversation, whether it be about sports or politics or food, it was the most amazing meal I've ever had. It was the most awful meal I've ever had, whatever. Whereas usually the right answer is like in the middle somewhere. And no more than in the native plant conversation, I think, in my opinion. So before I get going about the plants, just a quick intro of like who's the guy on the screen right now. Worked at Broken Arrow Nursery, where I got a lot of my plant knowledge, and then entered like different private estates, working with that with a passion for native plants and native ecology. And I always say I'm a nurseryman first, so I'm a farmer first. So it's kind of this idea of like, oh, you just grow plants for a living. And it's like, well, actually, yes, but a massive variety of different plants, different genera, different plant families in different growing stages, from seed, from cuttings, from graft, some old, some new, some in pots, some in the field being dug. So it's quite a big skill, and you get a very intimate understanding of plants when you're basically trying not to kill them, because no plant wants to be in a pot, no plant wants to be dug up. So you're trying to like artificially create an environment temporarily until it goes to its new home. So you're kind of like a foster parent for a bit, which is a tough job. Um, and after that, I entered the world of private horticulture, which again is just, oh, you're tending the garden. That must be nice. And it's like, usually for a client, it has to look good all the time, ever changing interests, ever changing fads, opinions, ownership, or would like a plant one year. And then the next year, they're like, why is that there? And you're like, you liked that plant last year, I swear. But okay. So you're kind of gardening through all these different things. So again, like different growing stages, but also like different stages of like ownership's kind of thoughts and mood. Um, and then always like a naturalist, I would always say, like, I just love the natural world. And as a gardener and as a nurseryman, it's both very inspiring and very depressing because I will never be as good a gardener as Mother Nature is. And I will never be as a good nurseryman, a grower of plants as nature is. There are plants you see doing so well in nature. It looks like a weed, it's doing so well. The second you try to propagate it in a pot, in the ground, from seed, from cuttings, it's incredibly difficult, and sometimes it could be a little bit frustrating. But always looking to nature as a designer, as a gardener, as a nurseryman is super helpful. Um, so again, when I say like gardening in the gray, just trying to like through observation and through intuition and through feel, like I think you become a better gardener. Like a lot of the books that are out there, a lot of the publications that are out there are written by people who've never done it. And as somebody, as a nurseryman, as a gardener, I've killed so many plants to finally find the right way to do it. And usually the times I killed it where I was doing it the way it was I read to do it. And then it's always that gardener who's never picked up a book, who's just been a gardener for 40 years, that they're the ones who know how to do something like really intimately. And they're like kind of gardening in the gray, just kind of like, oh, there's no fast and hard rules. You just kind of do it this way and it works out. Um, so yeah, this is the tunnel road, of course, and this is, I think, a good symbol for the native plant conversation because it's a very polarizing conversation, and gotten into a lot of like debates, shall we say? Um, and so it's a fun conversation. I'm really passionate about it, and other people are as well. So I just want to like touch on the conversation as a whole and how that is kind of being perceived like socially and through the scenes of like the gardening world and the like the kind of conservation world and things like that. Um, I always find the conversation enters a moral tone very quickly, and it abandons the idea of aesthetic or performance. And I'm a gardener, I'm a nurseryman, so I'm like, fine, it's like the right thing to do for like for bugs and for all these other things, but it's like I'm the gardener, I'm the homeowner. Like it's got to look good and it's got to perform well. So as much as I love native plants, they do have to do something for me, not just everybody, not just for the bees and the wildlife and all that stuff. I feel that the conversation enters a very educational tone very quickly, where people are trying to like teach you something right away and what all these plants do. And I'm like, I just want something that looks pretty. Like I didn't ask for this. And then like it's always about the work we have to do, about there are these populations of different animals that are like declining, and that's our responsibility. And the tone just enters like I'm being talked at, not being spoken with. So I always think that through this conversation we have to be like warmer, whether if we're really passionate about native plants, um, just to be warmer. And if we're not passionate about it, just being curious, I think is helpful, because the public's perception sometimes can be like, we're saying, oh, this plant looks great in senescence. And then the response is like, you mean dead? Like it looks dead. And then somebody saying, I don't want a bunch of roadside weeds in my garden, where I'm talking about all these cool, like pretty obscure native plants that, yes, you can find on a roadside. And I think the key there is that this public perception isn't wrong. It is correct. Those things do look dead, and those things are roadside weeds. But we just have to recognize that, yes, those things are true. but find a common thread that those roadside weeds are actually quite beautiful in a garden setting, and trying to perhaps redefine what dead looks like, and that some plants can, in their dry stage, have a little bit of a attractive quality compared to just something that's going to be barren for 6 months out of the year. So kind of validating people's concerns, people's like questioning about things, and then finding the joy and the kindness and like the passion for native plants, I think is really important. Um, and lastly, like with native plants, it's in addition to, not instead of. I think sometimes the tone can be like, you got to rip out your whole garden and plant all natives, which is a really tough place to start. It's just kind of, again, that's not a gray area. That's a very black and white thing. I think adding native plants into somebody's garden can be pretty inspiring, showing them the success, both from a performance standpoint and from an aesthetic standpoint of just these plants look great, they do really well. And then I think a homeowner or a gardener will slowly start to integrate more native plants. And before you know it, native plants are dominating their garden. So you got to the same place you wanted to get to without just right out of the gate being like, tear it all out. I think there just has to be a more organic approach to all that. Um, and then kind of like, why is there a demand for non-native plants in the first place? So I think we have to start there. Like, why is this even a conversation in the first place? I think a lot of it's learned behavior, planting what your grandmother planted, planting what your parents planted, planting but what you read about in a book that was published in the 80s. The non-native plants have a big head start. I think the native plant movement here is pretty new. Um, I think we kind of took a more of a European approach for a long time with plants, where it's just, hey, if it looked cool, plant it, and we'll think about the other stuff later. One thing I like to remind people of is that these plants that we're all into are Asiatic nativars. So all these cool Japanese maples, as an example on this screen here, in Japan, those are nativars. So they're just really far ahead of us on this conversation. They've been like selecting their native plants for a long time. So they just have a big head start on us. And all these plants are awesome. Like, it's undeniable. They look gorgeous. They perform well. They have this allure, sometimes this rarity. It's from far away, maybe a story about who selected it or where it came from. So I think the bottom line is like, the demand at the end of the day is because they're really cool and really awesome. So this is what we're kind of not competing with, but this is what people have in their brain about what a successful garden plant is, what a garden worthy plant is, as Dan said. So just to define what a nativar is, and I realize I'm kind of using the slang term, it's just a native cultivar. And what a cultivar is a cloned plant. So it's a selection of a plant. So if you grew 10,000 seedlings of a sugar maple, there would be one out of that 10,000 that was by far the best, that grew the fastest, that had the best autumn color, that had the best form, and that was the easiest to propagate, to make more of them. And you would select that one and put a name on it, Chris's sugar spice or something, and then that would be a cultivar. What I think cultivars of native plants, or nativars, as I'll keep describing them just to save time, they inspire interest. They broaden the expectations about what a plant can be. So different flower colors, different habits. So being able to install plants in a different area or accomplish a different color or a different texture than what you think that plant could do. It increases its usability. Also, nativars, because they're clones, once you do them, they allow for something to be predictable. And we'll go into that a little bit, but knowing that that plant is going to have the right fall color, and knowing that that plant is going to have the right flower color. Because seedlings, there's variability in everything. So if you plant a seedling, there's a general idea of what you're going to get, but there's a lot of inconsistency in that. Where if you don't have room in an entire meadow where that inconsistency all blends together and works, you're just planting one thing. So I think for the average gardener, the demand of knowing what flower color that's going to be, or what the habit is going to be, I think is really important. Um, what they don't get, like when the conversation about nativars takes place, is native range. And we'll go into that a little bit. But as an example, I will say our native swamp maple, or red maple, Acer rubrum, is native from Nova Scotia to Florida. So where that cultivar was selected will define its success. So yes, Acer rubrum's native to Connecticut, but where that cultivar is from is really important. And so some people just say, oh, it's native there. It's like, well, that selection isn't, which of course kind of leads into hardiness. That if you have a selection of, say, Douglas fir is native from British Columbia through Mexico, like the Christmas tree. So where that comes from, it's really important for a Christmas tree grower, let's say. And then one thing with nativars is you're getting some growers that are hybridizing with non-native species and then still calling them native, which I don't think is okay. So that's just a little where you get some mixed genetics that they're not quite honest about. Um, so yeah, nativars are clonal. They are the same every time. Some are naturally bred, like chance seedlings found in the wild, which we'll go into. An example of that is the lady slipper you see in front of you. That's pink lady slipper. Every once in a while, um, it'll throw off like a white seedling. If you were to, obviously you wouldn't want to dig that up, but if you were to somehow clonally propagate it, not from seed, but if you were somehow able to clone that plant, that would be a cultivar that nature made. There are naturally occurring hybrids of native species, which we will get into a little bit. So I would define these things as genetically modified. Everything you've ever eaten in your life is a genetically modified plant. It took a little bit of human interaction and propagation to create. I don't think it's genetically engineered. There's not like these evil guys in a lab like making these native plants. I wish the native plant industry had that kind of money behind it. That'd be really awesome, but it doesn't. So we don't pull those kind of funds yet. Hopefully one day we'll be that successful where these big scientists will want to get more involved with it. But yeah, I've known a lot of nurserymen, myself included, who've tried to like breed native cultivars. That mountain laurel in front of you, Connecticut State Flower, is a selection by Richard James, my former boss at Broken Arrow Nursery. That one's called Peppermint, and he just bred that because he found a seedling that had a little more markings in it, line bred it a little bit, and then created that, which I think is really cool. So getting into nativars now, and an example of kind of what we are going to want out of nativars is plants that are dioecious, where they're male and female plants. So if you purchase seedlings of, say, Nyssa sylvatica or black tupelo or bayberry or eastern red cedar, you don't know if it's going to have fruit or not, or it's even going to be able to have fruit. You don't know if it's a male or a female right away. So what nativars allow you to do is clone a really good female that produces really good fruit and allow you to guarantee yourself or your client or whoever that you're going to have fruit on that plant if you have a male there as well. So something like most people don't know that black tupelo is in fact dioecious, but sassafras is another one. Lindera, our native spice bush, that's another one where if you're telling somebody it's going to have red fruit, it's a roll of the dice. So having the ability to plant, say, a bunch more females and then have one male pollinator, you can accomplish a lot more of a fruit interest in your garden, which I think just really important, both for wildlife, the birds will eat it up also, but then you'll be able to kind of like tell a client, oh, this whole hedge of bayberry is going to be lit up in silver fruit. Whereas if you planted seedlings, it would be all over the place. There'd be some with no fruit, some with a little bit of fruit, some with a lot. And then same with a hedge of, say, Eastern red cedar, Juniperus virginiana, where these are going to be the plants that are going to replace privet and other plants like that, where we need a native replacement for these. But privet fruit, they have this beautiful dark blue fruit, and they're guaranteed to fruit. So we have to have a realistic and like successful solution to that. So these are some examples of how we can like guarantee in our landscape that we're going to have like this beautiful native plant that will fruit for us, as opposed to just rolling a dice with a seedling. With our native winterberry, which is cultivated around the globe for its beautiful winter fruit. This is an example again of if I'm planting 6 of them on my property, I want 5 of them to be female and 1 of them to be male. And I'll hide the male in the corner so it can still pollinate, but it doesn't do anything aesthetically. Like all of us men, we're here for a purpose. We're not here for our looks. That's what the lady's for. So we have something, and this is just a good example of a lot of the some of the issues and then some of the like solutions to with nativars. So the one to the left there, sparkleberry, which was introduced by the National Arboretum in Washington D.C., is in fact not a nativar. That is not a native plant. It's a hybrid between Ilex serrata, which is Japanese winterberry, which isn't as good as ours, and our native winterberry. So I would not describe that as a nativar. However, Ilex verticillata winter red is, as is winter gold. So Ilex verticillata winter red was selected. There was a grower who was just growing out winterberry for cut stem production and noticed this one that was incredibly heavy producing with berries, really thick skin, so they lasted well through the winter, and a really bright red color. So what they did was then they took cuttings, cloned that, propagated it, and now it's in most like many landscapes throughout the Northeast, even in the West Coast, throughout the USA, and it's used a lot in the cut stem production in like the Netherlands and things like that. Then, when they were growing countless amounts, like propagating countless amounts of Ilex winter red there, they noticed what we call a branch sport or like a mutation where one branch fruited orange and not red, just a natural mutation like a birthmark or anything else. And what they said was, that looks pretty cool. Propagated that, cuttings, now we have winter gold. Why I think that plant is so important is because that is the replacement for bittersweet reeds. So, bittersweet, which is a horrifically invasive plant here in the States, Oriental bittersweet. We do have a native one, but that's not what I'm talking about. So, Oriental bittersweet looks beautiful in a wreath. It is undeniable. It is a gorgeous plant, and there's not winter fruiting orange native plants. So this solves that problem. So now we have a wreath for the autumn into the wintertime that is a native plant, which is great. So before, when somebody had that demand of, I have this beautiful Oriental bittersweet wreath, you're not going to convince me to not plant it or not have it and not have it on my front door where birds are going to eat the fruit and then spread it. Now I have a solution to that issue where I can say, don't do that. This one's actually better anyway. It's got better color, the fruit lasts longer, and it's native. So that's great. So we've solved a problem there. And that's kind of going to be a theme here is that there is a public demand, which is completely understandable. And we're going to be able to satisfy that demand with a native plant as opposed to a non-native plant. And these are robins in the window boxes where we had uh, winter displays, and those were all winter red. So for folks, some folks will say, "Oh, the nativars, like native selections, aren't as good as seed grown plants." I would use this video as a polite rebuttal to that. Just birds seem to like it well to me, and you can see the starlings rolling in, waiting for their turn in the background there. But the robins were pretty greedy that day. Um, and of course, other animals like it too. I just like that picture, so I include that in the talk. I'm sorry. I think nativars are going to be the answer for a food movement in the future of growing native fruits. Um, Everything we eat is a cultivar, is a selection, but most of it isn't native. Lettuce isn't native here. Apples aren't native here. American is apple pie. Like apples are native to the Middle East. It's kind of funny. At least the selections that we use for apple pie. However, there are blueberries, low bush and high bush. That is a native. Cranberries, that is a native. Pawpaws. I think pawpaw breeding would be great because they don't ship well right now. They're very delicate. Like they make an avocado look tough by comparison. However, with some selective breeding, I think that could be a more commercially viable plant. Chokeberry, which is starting to be bred for actually for antioxidant production, it has higher antioxidants than blueberries do. So they're starting to introduce it into the juice industry. And the work by Dr. Mark Brand at UConn, he's doing a lot of cool stuff with that. Native grapes, native plums, native cherries, our Juneberry, Amelanchier canadensis. Um, and Anabandic labus. Those are both, I think, have a high commercial value. And I think we just have to breed them a little bit and propagate them a little bit to get fruit bigger, more fruit on the plant, so it's more commercially viable. And then our native hops, they've done a lot with that. Hops is native, which is cool. So that's like a whole other side of like nativars that I think when we think about aesthetic in the garden, there's also a whole other industry that I think nativars will feed one day, which is the fruit and food industry. Um, and when we talk about like the consistency out of nativars, like promises kept, I think is really important. So with let's say with autumn color, again with our example of Acer rubrum before, our red maple, the autumn color for that plant is across the board. It could be anything from like a dusty, like mustardy yellowy orange into like red, into pink, into like a dark burgundy, like Merlot color. Or sometimes it really won't have any fall color at all. It'll just kind of get like rusty brown and drop its foliage. So if you sell a seedling of Acer rubrum, red maple, or if you buy one, let's say, you don't know what the fall color is going to be. Yes, it's called red maple, but like you're not guaranteed of its fall color. So whereas with a cultivar, you know it's going to have a dark red, or you know it's going to have a bright red, or you know it's going to have a pink because that's why those things were selected. And I think that's really important as a way to like sell nativars and the native plants overall into like the general garden community, like the Home Depot community, the like big garden center box store community. Is like to be able to keep these promises and have people feel like they're getting what they want. Um, an example in the upper right there is Calicanthus floridus, our native sweet shrub. Um, that plant has, as the name would suggest, sweet shrub has a really sweet fragrance. But that's only some seedlings. It goes anywhere from like red wine vinegar into red wine, like a little sweet, and into fruit punch, like really like salivating sweet. Again, by seedlings, you don't know what you're getting. Whereas some selections that have been made, like Michael Lindsay and Edith Wilder, those ones are incredibly sweet smelling. So you just know what you're getting. And they have pretty good fall color too. Um, and then flower color, example here is ground phlox divaricata. That can be anywhere from like a soft pink to a soft lavender to a soft blue or a white. Don't know what you're getting when you buy a seedling. However, you can be intentional around that by buying selections like named cultivars. Another example would be asters. Those are all over the board. Our native aster from pink to lavender to blue to white in a single species. So if you know the species you're getting, you still have no idea what flower color you're getting. Um, and also promises kept with different habits and things like that. So I think like with cultivars, you're able to introduce native plants to where someone would not be able to would not think they could. So actually, this is a building right in the depot to the right here, which has a beautiful example of our native sweet gum, liquid amber styraciflua, one slender silhouette. So if they wanted to plant sweet gum right next to that house, right next to that building, it would not be a smart move. It would get way too big. You'd have to cut it down. It'd be like the oak to the left. It would just be massive. However, they want a tight, tall architectural piece by the house to like soften the broad sides of that house, that building. Now we can accomplish that with a native plant. And same with on the left there, our again, our native Juniperus virginiana, our eastern red cedar, that cultivar called Taylor, super tight. That plant in particular, if you drive along like a highway, typically like 95 or something like that, you'll see countless seedlings of them with an incredible variability of habit. Some of them grow like an egg shape, some of them grow tight like a column, some of them grow like a mound, some of them grow like an old tree, like this gnarly mess, anything in between. So again, if you buy a seedling, you have no idea what you're getting. Whereas when I buy Taylor, I know I'm getting this tight columnar piece that is not going to be a like a labor intensive thing. I'm not going to have to prune it. I'm not going to have to shear it. It does that on its own. So when I think about like garden worthy, it's like, how much work is this thing going to be? I'm kind of tight on time. I get to tell you, no, Taylor is going to be no work at all. Once you get it established, you are good to go. Um, More columnar pieces. If I told you a sugar maple that gets a foot wide and 30 feet tall, you'd say I was crazy. But there is example monumentale sugar maple to the left there. How are we going to, again, with privet or with European hornbeam hedges, like deciduous hedges that you see all throughout Long Island and all throughout the coastal United States? We need to have a native alternative to that. You can't just say no, you can't have a hedge. People want a hedge, they want their privacy. Totally get it. With Carpinus caroliniana, our native hornbeam, musclewood or whatever we want to call it, I have a solution to that now. I have a columnar selection of that, with which also has great fall color. Privet has terrible fall color. European hornbeam has terrible fall color. Now, not only am I accomplishing the hedging demand, but I'm also beating out my native alternatives with some great fall color. So even if the client doesn't really care about the native thing, about bees and the birds, which fine, I'm able to say this is still better. This is still number one. And then for Pinus strobus, for an evergreen hedge, if you have deer where our native like arborvitae, like emerald green arborvitae, are just getting eaten to bits, and white pine gets way too big when you just plant regular white pine on your border. You're chewing up all this real estate when you plant white pine as a border or as a screen because it grows out so much. It gets 30 feet wide. And real estate's not cheap. And I want to have more room in my yard. This way, something like Stow Pillar will only get 3 feet wide, 3 to 4 feet wide, but 20 feet tall. So I'll get my evergreen screen, I'll get my native, and I'm not going to chew up all my real estate, which I think is really important because as lots get smaller, as properties get smaller in the world, I think we're going to need to like satisfy that demand of I don't want this thing to take up a lot of space, but it has a real purpose that I need to accomplish. Purple foliage. I love purple foliage. It's just great. You get some very staunch native folks who say purple foliage is no good because it doesn't, there's anthocyane, the chemical that makes things purple, is sometimes not as palatable to certain caterpillars and things that would eat the foliage. It doesn't poison them, they just don't like it. However, with the foliage aside, it still has the flowers, it still has the fruit, it still has the leaf litter for birds for nesting material. So if there's one thing out of five or one thing out of 10 that the purple foliage doesn't accomplish, I will still recommend it because the public demand is going to be, I want a purple thing. I'm going to buy a Japanese maple. If so, they're going to do it either way. There's the demand for purple foliage either way, myself included. So how do we satisfy that demand while meeting folks halfway with some native things? So Rus coppelina, our native broadleaf sumac, Lanham's purple, which is a really cool plant, gets this kind of gnarly tree look. Great fruit that's edible, actually edible for humans, but also it's really tough to get to because the birds get to it first. Our native nine bark, this is going to be the plant that replaces all these non-native barberries. Because I can say, hey, not only is these selections like tiny wine and other things like that, where they stay very tight, they're a great alternative to barberry because they have better flowers than barberry does. They have purple foliage like barberry does, and they don't have the thorns. So this not only like satisfies, but it goes beyond, it wins, in my opinion. And then same with our native deer villa, different species that are native, where we have Kodiak Black and Night Glow and all these other things. These are going to be the alternatives to barberry. I can't believe barberry got as popular as it did in the States, considering what a thorny nightmare it is. It's just an awful plant to work with. But it did, for some reason, again, kind of learned behavior. But now we're back to being able to like get past that. Non-native grasses like purple pennisedums, which are incredibly invasive, red leaf panacedums, which are incredibly invasive. But they're red and they're gorgeous. It's undeniable. That's how they got invasive, is because they were really popular. It's rare that a really obscure plant that nobody cared about got popular or got invasive. It had to get like really popular first. So typically, like the nursery trade or sometimes the government got a lot of those plants out there and became invasive. So this is how we're going to get people off of those red leaf non-native grasses with our big leaf blue stem, our little leaf blue stem, and our native switchgrass, panicum there. So these are all different selections that we have. Black Hawks and Holy Smoke, all these cool little blue stems now. And then, of course, Ruby Ribbons, which was put out by UConn. and then a few others there. These are all just great plants that are going to be the answer to a demand from the general public. Um, Low hedges and stuff. This is more work by Dr. Mark Brand out of Yukon as he was breeding for antioxidant production for Aronia melanocarpa, our black choke berry. He was discovering just all the different variety in habit. So with ground hug or low scape mound, you have what will be like a 2 to 3 foot hedge, which will have amazing fall color, red fall color, beautiful flowers, as you can see, beautiful fruit. And then even a taller hedge there, like a 4 to 5 foot hedge to the right for like a patio hedge, things like that. Now we're able to accomplish that with a native plant. Um, cool fruit for the birds, edible. You can make jams out of it, just needs a lot of sugar. I love our native witch hazels. I'm super pumped on native witch hazel, so I'll probably spend a little more time than most people think I should on this. But you have a selection like Ice Queen, which will flower in December or January, like real late, which is awesome. Like it's just a cool plant that broadens our expectations of what our native witch hazel can do. So most people think of it flowering in fall, like October, maybe into November a little bit. This one is still tight and like starts to open around Christmas. It is wild, really cool. Harvest Moon down there, a selection from Broken Arrow Nursery, my former employer. That is just like a quintessential, like perfect selection of the species. So if you grew a million of them, you might not get one as good as this. So what it does is great, really broad, very crisp petals to it, and it drops its foliage first. It does a really good job of that because sometimes you'll see where they'll still have foliage on them and be flowering below the foliage, and you can't see the flowers because the foliage is there. Or you can't see the yellow flowers because it's in yellow fall color. So you can't kind of discern what's flower and what's not. Whereas this one, yellow fall color, beautiful, drops its foliage and then opens the flowers. And as you can see, I think that's quite a statement when you just get nothing but the flowers and the stems. And then lastly, a selection out of Brotsman Nursery out of Ohio. This is one called Winter Champagne. Again, flowers in like December, January. And this is actually a hybrid with our other native witch hazel, Amamelis vernalis, which that one typically flowers in like March. So what he did was he saved pollen from, I don't know what the pollen parent was and what the female parent was. But anyway, he stored pollen from one, pollinated the other, and then created that plant. So that's an example of what we were talking about, like a man-made one. That hybrid probably exists in nature because these plants, their habitats overlap. So they're growing next to each other, typically flowering at different times to where they wouldn't cross-pollinate. But at some point, one misflowered and probably created that. So that's one that I feel confident is out there, but he just did the work rather than just having to hike the Ozarks looking for that hybrid. He just kind of created it himself. But that is a great plant that I would describe as a nativar. Just two native plants that grow amongst each other, two native species, that is. And that's just a really cool plant where I have flowers in winter and it's native. And as climate change is like kind of getting things funky, I think it's good to be able to feed stuff at odd times of year. The stuff is waking up or not going to sleep at the wrong time. All these different bugs and bees out there, that it's nice to say, hey, I know you're staying out late. There's food in the fridge for you. Like there's food out there for you. I'm not going to be like, it's not going to be a lot, but we can help you out when we can. Um, and this is just a selection. This is my fiance and I were on a hike in Steep Rock and seeing the variability of these are just seedlings growing in the wild. So everybody, I think myself included, would think that, our native witch hazel flower is yellow. But you look around enough, you'll find some that go peach or go orange. And that's a selection where if I took that branch that was in her left hand and uh, grafted it or rooted it, I would then have like Julie's Delight or whatever we decided to name that selection, which is a beautiful like peachy orange one, right? So native like in the wild, like nature's an incredible breeder and produces some really cool plants. And if we have good eyes, we can like propagate those plants without tearing them out of the wild, propagate them clonally, and bring them into our gardens. I think that's really important and really inspiring. And this is again an example. This is another native one, native a little further south. Um, this is Hamamelis ovalis, and this is a picture Tim Brotzman sent me, who bred winter champagne. And this is the variability on the roadside driving through the Ozarks. Unbelievable. Really cool. I see three in there I would want in my garden. Where if you told me just as a whole what ovalis does, it's like, yeah, it's kind of like a muted, like pinky purple, nothing crazy. But then you can get some really cool variability there. And again, I see a ton in there that I want. Like, yeah, sign me up. Of course, redbud I think is a great native tree in the legume family of all things, like in the pea family. Typically flowers like a pinky purple kind of thing. But for all these like different white flowering trees, like Bradford pear, which is incredibly invasive and an awful plant. I don't know. That's another one. I don't know how it got popular. I have an alternative for that. So I have royal white there. I'm like, I got your white flowers. It's got better foliage. It's got these beautiful heart-shaped leaves, but I got your white flowers. And then, oh, I want a weeping white, like Japanese white flowering cherry, just that classic grandma plant. Everybody's got that flowering cherry out front. I'm able to accomplish that with vanilla twist, where I could say, yeah, don't do that. Do this white flowering redbud. That'll be great, and it has less pest problems than cherries do. Um, Whoops, sorry. Uh, Silver foliage. I'm a huge fan of like silver foliage. I think it makes everything else in the garden like pop, even greens next to it, let alone purples and things like that. So I like silvers and grays in the garden because I think they make all the other colors look like brighter and look like more vibrant. Um, our native violet there, silver gem, which is like a little ground cover, really cool plant. So can get amongst rocks and really pop with like some native like granite like outcroppings and things. Salix candida, which is our native a native pussy willow, gets small. That plant only gets like 4x4 instead of like the massive pussy willows that get way too big and are thugs in the garden. This one's called Iceberg Alley. And that's the foliage. If it didn't do anything else, if it didn't have like beautiful flowers as well, I wouldn't I wouldn't care. Like I wouldn't even like think about it. So but it does. So that's great. And then blue elf, Fothergilla, our native, I guess bottle brush. I don't know the common name for that. There's a beautiful one where it's tight, like different Fothergilla selections get like 5 to 6 feet tall. This one gets about half that. Beautiful small blue foliage there, and then great fall color too. Can be used as a hedge or just as like a single piece in a perennial border or something like that. But I love grays, and it's called gardening in the gray, so I have to kind of do this page. But um, yeah, I just love silver foliage. It makes just everything else look better. Um, and in the Salix picture there, that is um, a native nine bark there, Physocarpus in the backdrop. So instead of barberry being there, now we have another native popping off right next to it. No plant collecting, so I couldn't look for any cool plants there, unfortunately. So it was just camera gear, and that was it. But I'm always on the lookout for new plants, always. Um, Lastly, like foliage, I think we think about flowers, we think about berries, we think about like habit, columnar, dwarf, things like that. I'm always asking when I look at plants and I'm propagating plants and I'm in a garden, is what has that plant done for me lately? I love a good magnolia or a good cherry that flowers in April. When it's like July and I'm staring at that plant, I'm like, what have you done? Like it's long in the past. So I always think variegated foliage or purple foliage or silver foliage is a great way to get native plants in the garden because you're never asking that plant, what have you done for me lately? It's right in front of you. It's looking gorgeous. So our native Solomon seal, polygonatum, that was one seedling I found in my woods. Um, our native mayapple with a pink flower instead of white. You're a plant nerd when you're into that because that flower is like underneath the foliage. You have to like get up, like lay down to see that flower, but whatever. A good example of our native milkweed with some beautiful foliage. Our native milkweed is in fact a weed. Like you don't want it in your garden typically. If you do, you don't want a lot of it. You don't want it in your pasture. But if that popped up in my garden, it would stay. That plant looks pretty good. It looks like a Van Gogh painting or something. Same with that native aster, Aster divaricatus, a wood aster. Wood aster is pretty weedy, but if it looked like that, I wouldn't mind. And then our native, what would that be, like golden bells, uvularia there, different ones I found. Um, those look pretty good to me. And with nativars, we have more to do. We have to get rid of boxwood. I despise boxwood. And I know probably a lot of people on this call have boxwood in their garden. Maybe a lot of those people really like boxwood. I do not apologize if I offend you. I despise boxwood. It's a maintenance nightmare. You have to cover it in burlap because it doesn't want to be here in our winter. So it's a labor, like another labor nightmare. It gets boxwood blight now. So it's an incredible, has big pest issues, leaf miner, spider mite, and now boxwood blight. So you're dousing it in all these like pesticides and fungicides just to keep it alive. And it's green and the flowers don't smell great. It doesn't do anything. However, our native inkberry, Ilex glabra, that would be a great alternative. The flowers smell like honey, like sweet, like honey. Beautiful glossy foliage, easier to prune, no pest issues. And the females get this beautiful black fruit that the native birds love. But you could also plant all males if we had nativars, so you wouldn't have to deal with the fruit if it were like close to a patio where you didn't want like the bird nests or something like that. So more to do there. I want a green fruited winterberry. So one that fruits, but it doesn't ripen all the way. So then you'd have your red and your green. And that would make me a millionaire for the cut stem industry because I would patent the plant and then I would be a millionaire. But I haven't been able to find that yet. That one is yet to ripen, unfortunately. And there's all these cool like native trees and shrubs. Our native Stewartia there, which has like that tea flower. There's so many genera and species that people like just haven't found yet. Because that plant, for example, that Stewartia, has hardiness issues, habit issues. It's really sloppy and it's really difficult to propagate. But if you found a seedling that rooted really well, that maybe had a good habit, everyone would want that plant in their garden because Japanese Stewartia is really popular in gardens, and I totally understand why. Our native one, the flower is better. We just have to figure out a couple extra things. So I always ask the crowd, what plant are you dreaming of that's native that you were like, if only it flowered this color, or only if it didn't get as big, or if only it were a little less of like a maintenance issue. The nursery industry like wants to know that stuff. And like we're all doing it and we're all like looking for the next big thing. So I always ask like you all, like, what are you dreaming of? Because it might even be out in the woods on your next walk. You never know. That's how all this cool stuff is found. Chance seedling or like wild specimen, something like that. It always has a cool story. Um, don't trust these guys. When these guys are producing native stuff, when I talk about mixed genetics, they're not being honest about because they're hybridizing with like non-native plants. These are the guys I'm talking about. These are the big business that like I don't trust, and it's better to work with your local nurseries that are like propagating and doing cool stuff because these guys aren't honest about genetics. They have no idea where the plant was collected, so they're telling you it's hardy in your zone. Um, Endless Summer Hydrangeas being a great example of that. Like to just, he's propagating, like they're propagating for hydrangea hardiness, and their trials are in Georgia. And you're telling me it's going to be hardy in Connecticut. Got it. Okay. Um, and this is not the dialogue I trust when I talk about like publications that like tell you how to do it. I'm like, these are written a lot of times with some exception. You have Tova Martin and all these other folks who are avid gardeners who do Paige Dickey, who have done it, who've killed plants and who've done it the wrong way and have done it the right way and who like are writing out of like from their soul. A lot of this stuff is just, it's all academic kind of knowledge. It's all in theory. It's folks who haven't done it. So this is not the dialogue I value. This is the dialogue I value. It's this dialogue right here where we're just like nerding out together and brainstorming together and having fun and trading ideas and like learning together. And I think that's the dialogue that I think is most valuable. So I thank Steep Rock for allowing me to enter that dialogue with you all today. Um, yeah, I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be a board member and honored to be a part of the Washington community. So thank you so much. Dan, do you want me to stop the share or how do you want me to? Sorry.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry about that if I was staring blank into the screen. Um, yeah, that was an amazing talk, Chris. Thank you so much. I mean,
Thanks.
if
Thank you
I
so
had
much.
if I had any doubt whether or not you were passionate about what you do, that doubt is no longer. That there's a lot of awesome information in there, and just to let everyone know, in the chat section, well, I could see a few questions coming in right now. We have a chat section down below. If you just kind of scroll around, you could find it. It'll pop up, and Chris is happy to take a few minutes and answer any questions you have. So I'm going to start off with a question. So you gave the example earlier of the winterberry as kind of a good example of a nativar, something that's propagated, clonally propagated. And you gave the example of taking a seed. You know, if you have a sapling that's grown from a seed, it's going to have a lot of genetic variability, so you're not sure what you're going to get. Nativar, you're pretty sure what you're going to get, and that's the whole point for many people. But I'm just curious, can you talk a little bit about the process of cloning, and is it a lot of work? Because you can grow, 1,000 seeds, 10,000 seeds with in a greenhouse with minimal amount of work. But what about propagating?
So with clonal propagation, I would say there's a few different ways. One is from cuttings, where you take a cutting usually in summertime when it's quite soft, and you root that cutting. So you'll stick the cutting in a rooting hormone, stick it in a growing medium in a high humidity environment, and try to get that plant to grow roots from the stem. Um, that for some plants is really difficult or impossible. Like they just don't do that. And then for some, it's pretty easy. So that's a plant by plant basis. Um, for a plant like a hydrangea or a winterberry, it's like not too hard. Um, for like a plant like a sugar maple or actually a witch hazel, it's very difficult. So then we also have grafting where you cut more like we do with apples. You have a seedling here, you cut the plant you want and then graft it on, and then that basically that cutting uses the roots of the seedling and then grows on from there. The issue with that is then sometimes the roots want to sucker, they want to grow themselves. So then you have two plants trying to fight each other. So you just have to be aware of that. Like you get suckers from an apple tree or from your cherry tree or things like that. Um, and then we have like root cuttings, which is kind of more obscure. With perennials, you have division where you have a clump where you can just cut it up and divide it. And we've all done that with plenty of different things, whether it be sedums or whatever, where you can just dig it up in spring or fall, like we do with like iris, whatever, and just like chop them up. And you take one big one and turn it into four small ones. You can do that with a lot of native grasses and things like that. So on a commercial scale, like cuttings and grafting helps because you can make a lot of them very quickly. But in a
Mm,
garden setting, if you found one that you really liked, you can just dig it up and sometimes chop it up and go from there.
okay, great, thank you. Um, so we have a question here for you. Great presentation. Can we get the replay somewhere? Oh yes, we can. This is being recorded and it'll be available at the Steep Rock Association website, so you can rewatch this whenever you want. And regarding,
The boxwood thing, let's see. Replacing boxwoods, I think our native inkberry is the best alternative right now because it's evergreen, beautiful glossy foliage, pretty much a round habit on its own, but takes to shearing well. Um, I think that's our best shot right now. There's some others that could be okay, but I think Inkberry is the one. And some of the big producers are starting to catch on to that. Yeah.
yeah, how does that work? I mean, obviously, the things that you find in the big nurseries are there for a reason. I guess they're popular and easy to grow. But I mean, a lot of what you talked about is people have opinions, and maybe you can educate people and help to change opinions. But that seems like, I mean, just what's out there available in the nurseries. It seems like it's would be an uphill battle. No.
Yeah, what I see is basically smaller independent nurseries, like family nurseries, propagating and patenting a plant that they think is really cool, like an inkberry, let's say. The big businesses see that and they're like, oh, that got pretty popular, and that person, that nursery, independent nursery, made some money off of that patent because that plant got pretty popular. All they care about is money, so then they'll get onto that fad. They don't care that it's like, they don't, on a moral level, don't care about the native thing at all. They just care about the money. So a lot of it is the independent nurseries taking the financial risk of patenting and mass producing a plant, hoping they can get the public on board. And when they do, then big business swoops in
Mm.
and like basically copies the idea, which is like fairly typical for most big business, to be honest.
So another question for you. You may have touched on this a bit already, but if you could recommend one switch out for a garden or someone's home use, what would that be?
Um, let's see. Like, I guess, I mean, the barberry is always the biggest one, just because I feel like that was so planted for so long, and I hate that plant so much that now that there's purple leaf nine bark and purple leaf deer villas, I think there's like alternatives to that. Whereas before, even 10, 15 years ago, there weren't.
Mm.
So when somebody had a barberry, like I didn't have a like a wisecrack answer to them, but now I do. Um, let's see. Sometimes I'm just trying to think of stuff that really seeds around a lot. You're starting to see Japanese maples seed around a little bit, like a
Mm.
little bit more than I would like. And I'm a huge fan of Japanese maples. My first love of plants, and my truest love of plants is Japanese plants. They're awesome. But now with purple leaf red buds and that purple leaf sumac I mentioned, we have some pretty cool plants that we're accomplishing the fall color out of that sumac. We're accomplishing the habit. We're accomplishing the size. Uh, so yeah, I think we have some good alternatives there.
Great. And are there vegetable nativars?
Let's see. I'll start with fruit. So every blueberry you've ever eaten is a nativar.
Mm.
Um, Low bush and high bush. A lot of those are selected in other countries and then end up back here, but they're all ours. Um, they're starting to produce some cool pawpaws now, like for fruit production. They don't ship well, so commercially it's not a good idea, but in your yard it would be pretty cool. For vegetables, obviously, like our native ramp is a pretty cool thing,
Mm.
which I wouldn't mind if somebody started to kind of get bigger bulbs, because like all the onions and garlic we've ever eaten was bred for hundreds of years before it got to where it was today. If you did that with our native ramp, like who knows what it could be? You could have native ramps with bulbs this big, with foliage like this, and maybe it doesn't melt as quickly in the summer, so it lasts longer into our season. Like you could just breed for a lot of different things. So that would be cool.
Nice. And let's see. So you talked about the nurseries that you were more fond of and less fond of. How
Mhm.
about books or a website that talks about this type of thing? If someone's just interested and they wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the subject on their own, are there resources you can recommend?
Yeah, different botanic gardens for sure. There's Highstead Arboretum in Reading that has a pretty cool like speaker list and has a cool resource list there. It's a pretty obscure arboretum that is doesn't, but it's a solely native arboretum. So they have collections of Kalmia in there and a few other things. That place is pretty cool and not well known. So give them a shout out. Broken Arrow Nursery, the owner Richard James, Dick James, he basically made, his idea was, let's make mountain laurel our state flower popular. So most selections that are out there are from him. He has a book as well, because he saw how popular non-native rhododendron were like through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and he's like, this makes no sense when we have our evergreen, like broadleaf evergreen native shrub that could be doing the same thing. Um, Coastal Maine Botanic, like there's some folks out there. Andrew Brand, who's the director of horticulture there. The former executive director, Bill Kalina, he has some really cool books that are out there. Um, and then, yeah, I think that's a good start anyway. And then just field guides. Like I get into just like good publications of field guides. And
Mm,
then you're just finding out about native plants that you just probably walked by a million times, but walked by them at the wrong time of year when they weren't doing their thing. And then you're like, whoa, that's a cool plant. Then you keep an eye out for it. So I really get into the field guide stuff lately, just because it, again, you're stepping on stuff that you don't even realize how cool it was a month ago.
right. Sorry, did we do the witch hazel question? I want to be sure we got to that one.
I don't think so. What was that?
Okay, so regarding witch hazel that blooms in December and January, which wildlife does this benefit? Is the point of including native plants to think not so much about the human aesthetic, but to benefit pollinators and other wildlife? I guess they're referring to, as you were talking about, the
Yeah.
January blooming witch hazel.
Yeah. So I guess my point about nativars is that uh, for the average person, the point of any plant they're spending money on is for it to look good for them. And that is undeniable. And that is not, that is like, that's perfectly okay for that to be a demand that it has to look good first. And I'll give a hoot about the bugs later. That's okay. So I think the point of any garden worthy plant first is that it has to look cool for the person spending the money on it, chewing up their real estate on it. However, with some of those like late flowering ones, I just find a lot of native wasps and native bees and native bugs. Their sleep schedules are getting all screwed up right now because of like our really late warm winters that we're having. Like winter seems to start a lot later than it used to. So if those things are still up at night, or up into winter, having a native food resource for them, in this case, like the flowers and the nectar in the witch hazel, I think that's a good thing. Um, and then it also flowers at a cool time of year. But that's going to be the plant that keeps people from planting the spring flowering, like Japanese witch hazels, like Hamamelis intermedia, which is most of the witch hazels you see out there, the ones that bloom in like March.
Mm.
Most of those are like Asiatic hybrids. So I'm able to satisfy that demand of like something that flowers in winter while also helping out our native stuff. I've also seen honeybees on this stuff quite a bit. Those are not native, so I don't count those as a native pollinator. But if you care about the honeybees, like they come out when it's a 60-degree day in December, and at least they'll have something to eat when they do that. So
Okay, great. Well, I think
cool.
that's about it for the questions. Again, thank you so much, Chris. This is super interesting.
I'm honored, really. Thank you so much.
And we will see all of you again in 2027 for when this series starts again. But all right, thank you so much.
Thanks.